Welcome back, everybody. This is Rafa again. Today, we are continuing with our conversation with Michael Cremo. And yeah, we were just, before started recording the second half, we were speaking about, what I was closing with on the first half, these two sides to Michael's work or to Michael's persona, let's say, or public persona, his archaeological work, as well as his spiritual I wouldn't say spiritual work, but his spiritual side. Okay, let's call it that. And yeah, and you were mentioning how you choose to explore the archaeological side, and you share how it connects, let's say, to the spiritual tradition of India, or how the spiritual traditions from India have mentioned things that connect to the evidence that you're finding. And then you just leave the stuff there and allow for people to continue pulling on the different threads as they are, as their capacity or their abilities or their curiosity and interest allows them or requires them. And I definitely agree with that way of doing it. You know, there's my own spiritual path took me through. I started with movies like What the Bleep Do We Know and The Secret, stuff like that. We're also kind of looking into the metaphysics of existence, and slowly those things started drawing me closer to spirituality. And for some reason, the traditions from India, they resonate very much with me in a very deep level, probably something from another life. But eventually I crossed paths with my spiritual teacher, who is from Taiwan. He's a Taoist. It's a particular line or tradition that comes from Chinese Chan Buddhism, so kind of like Zen from Japan. It comes from that line, but it at some point, I'm not very sure how, it's also connected with the Taoism. So when the patriarchs moved from India, they went to China. That's kind of the origin of the tradition that I'm formally most connected to, let's say. But I'm more of like a kind of free spirit kind of thing, kind of like I take stuff from many things, and I think that kind of reflects in the fact that I'm not from like a purely Buddhist or purely Taoist tradition, but actually a tradition that's kind of a mix between them. And in fact, Buddhism, as many people might or might not know, Buddhism is kind of like an offshoot from the original traditions that happened in India. So there's Hindu concepts within Buddhism. So in a way, you know, my own tradition has the original kind of. I would even dare to call Taoism kind of shamanic, you know, because of its connection to nature. So it's got this kind of shamanic, Taoist, Buddhist, Hinduist, and who knows what else kind of tradition within it. And I think for me, it's been a very nurturing kind of thing, you know, to have learned in such a varied way. And then eventually also, and at the same time, I will be studying like Hermetic traditions and stuff from maybe what we could call the West, which also has its roots in the East. So it's all a very beautiful thing, you know, spirituality and religion, how everything is talking about the same thing, and everybody's confused because of the words that the other person is using. And then because of our own insecurities maybe or childhood traumas or whatever, we get mad at the person for using the wrong word, and conflict arises. But I think what's most beautiful is this ability to speak, what's this called interreligious, or right, like to get together. Recently I was speaking with a friend who mentioned this idea of a tradition. I don't remember which one it was, that they do this gathering in which they get people from different religions to talk about the similarities and the points of connection, you know, instead of what we are so used to doing, of always pointing out our differences and how one is, yeah, you think this, I think that, everything is different. But then one of the things that my teacher, I remember he saying, was that all religions are 90% correct. So he was saying all religions basically share 90% of the thing, and then there's this smaller percentage in which they speak differently or point to something slightly different. But there's this basic thing that we all share in our different traditions and in our own personal gnosis, you know, that that I think is what we should be focusing more on, rather than that very small portion in which we speak different words.
Yes, Rafa. Uh, I'll say a few things related to points that you made. You started out by describing my methodology, and basically, I kind of entered, public life, you could say, with my book Forbidden Archaeology, which contains archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, evidence that human beings like us have existed on this planet for far longer periods of time than modern science now accepts. Uh, Today, scientists believe that the first humans like us appeared less than 300,000 years ago. However, as I point out briefly in the introduction to Forbidden Archaeology, the historical writings of ancient India, the Puranas, give a much more ancient human presence on this planet going back many millions of years. And actually, there is archaeological evidence that's consistent with that. If you look into the history of archaeology beyond what you see in today's textbooks, you'll find that archaeologists, geologists, and other scientists have found human bones, human footprints, human artifacts that go very far back in time, in some cases, tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years. Now, when I present this information at universities or on radio interviews or podcasts or in so many different ways, I mention the Vedic inspiration for my work and then kind of go into the archaeology and say it's consistent with what the Vedic literature tells us. And I kind of let people pick up on whatever it is interests them. Some people kind of approach me and want to know more about the archaeological work. And I'm happy to respond to them on that level. But there are some who become more interested in the Vedic background, the Indian spirituality in the background of my work. And they become interested in that in a general kind of way. And I'm happy to respond to them as well. And a few become really specifically interested in what my particular spiritual discipline is. And it's bhakti yoga. It's the yoga of devotion. That's what I'm specifically into. If they want to get into the details of that, I'm happy to respond to them on that level, because I really prefer to deal with people who are genuinely interested in a topic. I'm not into trying to ram something down somebody's throat, like that just isn't what I like to do. So I kind of leave it up to the person who's interested in my work. If they want to pursue a certain topic, I will.
Yeah, and I was bringing up this because, and I forgot to mention it when I talked about my own tradition and my teacher. I was mentioning this because one of the things also that I remember that I learned from him is that he would always say that if a person doesn't ask about something, then you should not say it. So let's say we're speaking about a particular spiritual topic or whatever, and the person asks a particular question, you should go ahead and share what you know about that when you're asked, but trying to be mindful and aware of limiting yourself to the question that the person is asking, because sometimes we get excited by the truths or the understandings actually that we have, that we start kind of going a little bit overboard, and the other person might not be ready for the information yet. It might not be the moment for them. They might still need to process what they are actually asking before they can digest another kind of food. And he would say that it's very important to really be aware of what you're being asked when you are responding, trying to focus on that. And there's this, about the Mandela effect, yeah?
Explain it to me. I don't think
All
I've
right.
heard it.
Yeah, the Mandela effect is this idea that things are appearing to change, and so one of the places or the areas where they are changing is, for example, where people are noticing, apparently noticing changes, is in, for example, popular culture, or like, let's say, one of the typical ones is the name comes from people remember Mandela dying in prison, but then eventually Mandela, one day he was out of prison and he died, and that's when people started noticing, well, wait, but I remember him dying in prison and now he's alive and he's just died. That's crazy. And there's other similar examples of like phrases in movies or images, or, for example, there's this character, I believe it's a monkey, it's called Curious George, who people remember him having a tail, but if you look now, he doesn't have a tail. Or there's different brands of cereal which are spelled differently than people remember it, and it's a very interesting thing. Some people connect it perhaps to CERN, and they say that maybe when CERN was turned on, it started manipulating time space or whatever timelines or something like that. We are maybe jumping into different, like, together we're all like jumping into another parallel universe where the Fruit Loops are spelled differently or stuff like that. So in the spirit of the Mandela effect, I have a question for you, since you're very 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 learned in the Bhagavad Gita and all this tradition. I remember reading, maybe it's a misremembrance of mine, or maybe I'm just not finding it, but I remember reading in the Bhagavad Gita this phrase. I believe it was Krishna speaking at the time, where he was talking about this very same subject. And since you bring it up, I'm thinking, okay, so there is some possibility that this is part of the tradition. So I'm going to ask you. I remember that what he was saying is that it's immoral to help. I don't remember exactly the quote, but it's immoral to help somebody who doesn't wish to be helped. Do you know of a kind of concept like that within the Bhagavad Gita?
Um, there is a concept that a spiritual master or guru or teacher should instruct only his students. In other words, somebody that has approached this person as a student and sees the person as a teacher, that person you can instruct. Whereas, the teacher shouldn't just go out and broadcast these teachings to
evangelize.
Like that. So that is there. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says towards the end in the 18th chapter that these teachings should be given to his devotees, they're called. In other words, people that are attracted, who want to have some spiritual connection or relationship, who voluntarily come and ask to receive it. They're the proper recipients of this kind of knowledge. Now, the subtle point might be that, well, you could perhaps as a teacher offer people the opportunity to become a student. Like, I'll be giving a talk somewhere, and then whoever comes. Like myself, I give a lot of lectures at universities and things like that, educational institutions. I've given many over the course of the decades. And my least favorite one is where a teacher brings me into a classroom and I have to speak to people who don't necessarily want to be there. I don't like that. I much prefer, all right, if the school wants to invite me, just say, okay, I'm going to be giving a talk about forbidden archaeology at 1 p.m. in room such and such. If you want to come. Then at least I know those people want to be there. I don't like speaking to a captive audience.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. And so, and have you noticed any changes? I mean, people have found it's weird on the Mandela Effect subject. People have found changes in the Bible, for example. There's this one about the I'm not very. Let's see if I can remember it correctly, but the lamb laying with the lion or something like that, which I think now it's turned into the lamb laying with a wolf, or maybe it's the other way around. They found stuff like that, or some verses appear to be different in their translations. I don't know, and maybe have you found anything like that within the Bhagavad Gita? Maybe like you go to a verse and you're like, I think this used to be different, or I don't remember this one quite like this. Like, for example, I'm probably confused, but I'm so sure that I read in the Bhagavad Gita this idea of, and it was something that was very, very important, a very important lesson for me, that it's not just kind of not useful, or I mean, it's like speaking to somebody that's not interested in. It's like it's not only unuseful. I'm trying to find the word. Sorry, it's not just let's say unuseful, to speak to somebody who doesn't want to hear. It's like speaking to deaf ears, I think is the phrase. But it's not only that, it's also the subtle point that reached me from this phrase is that it's also immoral to do that. It's like not just a waste of time, but you're actually doing something that's not correct. That was a very important point for me, and it's interesting that it resonates with the message that you do find in the 18th chapter.
Yeah, I can't recall having seen it put exactly as you said, but there are different Vedic injunctions that one shouldn't speak to an unqualified person, because you could just wind up disturbing their minds, and they create some difficulty, that if you hadn't spoken to them, they wouldn't be in, so.
Yeah, there's definitely that possibility of creating certain chaos in another person, and which in turns becomes your own karma to work out later, because the consequences of what you create over there
Yeah.
Are definitely your own property, let's say. So since we are also speaking about spirituality and weird, the weird, and changes in stuff related to time, I have this note here that I wanted to ask. I'm very interested in the Hindu ideas of time, the cycles of time, the Yugas, the Manvantaras, even larger. And it's so interesting how in recent times we are starting to, I think one of the first uh, pop things that started to help in this was that movie, I don't know if you remember it, called Zeitgeist. They were the first ones that I remember who started describing the precession of the equinoxes, I think is the name, and that is connected to the Yuga cycles, correct?
In some schools of thought, in the line that I follow, we kind of stick to you could say the traditional system of the yugas as it's given in the Puranas and the astronomical texts of ancient India, which are called the Jyotish Shastras, like Surya Siddhanta. And they have a system of 4 ages: Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali, that follow each other one after another. And according to the traditional system, the whole cycle of 4 lasts 4,320,000 years. Actually, it's million, 4,320,000 years. And they're like the seasons. You've got spring, summer, winter, fall in the temperate parts of the world. You've got those seasons, and they follow one after another in a cycle. So that's the traditional system. There was the guru of Paramahamsa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar is his name. He came up with a system that is much shorter than 4,320,000 years. Yeah, that's Paramahamsa Yogananda. But he had his guru, Sri Yukteswar. So at the sort of end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, Sri Yukteswar came up with a shorter Yuga cycle that is tied to the precession cycle, the precession of the equinoxes, which that cycle is roughly 24,000 years.
And so,
And
according to that, that is the one that differs from the traditional one that you follow, correct? So I
yeah,
understand he was one of his points is that we are actually entering or have entered into the Dvaparayuga, which is the golden age, correct?
well,
Whereas in your tradition, I understand we're still in the Kali Yuga. Is that right?
yeah, yeah,
Very
which
different.
appears to be the case if we look around the world. You know, like the system of the yugas starts with Satya Yuga, which is a golden age where people live very simply, naturally, everyone's engaged in spiritual life. There's no division into social classes. There are no urban areas or cities. Everyone is living close to nature, which is providing everything they need. You know, the climate is very nice. It's paradisical. And then in the next age, Treta Yuga, things begin to deteriorate a little bit. People begin dividing themselves up into different classes, a warrior class, a teacher class,
Mhm.
you know, they began dividing themselves up and then living in more developed communities, towns, cities, but everything is still running kind of nicely. Then in Dwapara Yuga, they began having wars, and things like that. Things are still going according to some rules and regulations. There's established worship and temples and churches and things, kind of established religious organizations and things like that. And even in warfare, it goes on, but it's done according to some kind of moral principles. But then the age of Kali, the age that we're in now, it's really degraded, and it's getting worse all the time in terms of environmental and social disturbances, and to me, it's pretty clear we're in a Kali Yuga, but it's uh, Sri Yukteswar's idea, as he says, that we're entering a Dwapara Yuga, which would be a highly developed age with lots of moral principles and organized spirituality going on in the forms of temples with elaborate worship and things going on. But we don't really see that so much today. Rather, we see, wars, social disturbance, climate crisis. Looks more like Kali Yuga to me, but that's my opinion. Everyone will have to make up their own minds about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And do you know if according to Yukteswar from Dwapara Yuga we would then move to Kali Yuga, or will we go the other way back to Treta?
Well, his system is, I mean, the normal system is, like I said, the seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, then another spring, summer, fall, winter, another spring, summer, fall, winter. His idea is that you go Satya, Treta, Dwapara, Kali, then you go Kali, Dwapara, Treta, Satya.
Kind of like a
In other words, you
pendulum.
go the other way,
Mm.
like that.
Yeah, sort of like a pendulum. Okay.
Yeah,
It's also interesting. And I was thinking that in a certain way, just like I understand the yugas, like they are kind of for example, in the Mayan calendar, you have like very large wheels of time, which they
yeah,
all go, one goes inside the other, and kind of like a clock. When one of the engines, or the gears, sorry, when one of the gears moves, it moves like a bunch, and it moves a little bit of the other one, and that's the kind of the visual that I have. And I understand that in this tradition as well, the yugas, I believe they are part of something larger. I think it's the manvantaras, you can correct me. um,
yeah,
but I'm also thinking that then if we went kind of down in the fractal, maybe there would be a kind of possibility for something like what Sri Yukteswar was saying, to be like, okay, so we are in the yugas, we are in Kali Yuga, but within this Kali Yuga, there's this pendulum that does golden age all the way to iron age and back up to golden age and the pendulum, while at the same time still being in Kali Yuga, there's like uh, a kind of gradient within the Yuga that conforms the 4,320,000 years. There could be something like that.
yeah. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference called CPAC. It's organized by someone who's a supporter of Sri Yukteswar's ideas. So they invited me to come and speak and hear what they had to say. And my kind of proposal was that uh, in the Vedic astronomy, the precession cycle is recognized, but if somebody wanted to tie the Yuga cycle to that precessional time scale, that 24,000 year time scale, then they should use a different name. The processional Kali Yuga, the processional this, so that was my suggestion. And I think you're right that the yugas are there's a kind of a structure within them. For example, although we're in the Kali Yuga, according to the traditional understanding, the Kali Yuga began roughly 5,000 years ago. And it's expected to go on for a total of 432,000 years, which means
How long ago did it start again?
5,000, roughly 5,000 years. I mean, specifically the year 3102 BC, which would be about, I don't know, now we're in 22. So now it's basically 5,130 years or something like that.
And sorry to cut you off with the point you were making, but I got curious of ancient human civilizations. what period is this 3000 BC?
That would be the end of the Dvaparayuga, according to the traditional understanding. And at that time, there was, according to the Vedic literature, there were highly developed cities in India, Vedic cities like Hastinapur and Dwarka and different cities like that, Indraprastha. And there was a developed civilization at that time. For the origin of the human species, you have to go all the way back to the creation of this planet. So
for example, people like Sumerians and Egyptian cultures, what was their development around that time? Were they already present?
Yeah, they were already present at that time.
Allegedly, who knows really, no? But that's the mainstream, at least, like to get a kind of general view from like a mainstream view.
According to what you would read in the textbooks at that time, most scholars would say you have the Indus Valley civilization in northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent. In China, you have a civilization, I'm thinking the Yangtze River Valley. In Egypt, you have the Egyptian civilization on the Nile, and then you would have the Sumerian civilization in the Mideast. And they would say those were the civilizations at that time. Of course, in the Western world, they also had a civilization in Mesoamerica, Middle America. So that's...
sorry to cut you again once again. So, and if we were to tie it into the fall of Atlantis, is this more or less the time period? A little bit earlier before, probably.
It depends. I mean, there's so many different ideas about Atlantis. I mean, basically, it comes from the works of Plato. And I think, trying to think when he described it happened. I don't remember exactly.
Right. His ancestor tells him about learning about Atlantis in Egypt, that they said, I think it was like 6,000 years before him or something around that. I'm trying to remember as well. I'm going to see if I can find it.
It's,
right.
It would be, so Atlantis would be before that time. But here we're just kind of talking about the standard accepted ideas. If you get into Egypt, you get the king list. I mean, the pharaoh list that goes back much further than 5,000 or 6,000 years. It goes back 70 or 80,000 years. You have the king list from Sumeria and Babylonia that go back 432,000 years, which is an interesting figure because that's the length of the Kali Yuga.
Still, all of this stuff we're talking about, except perhaps this Sumerian list, still more or less all within the Dvaparayuga. So Atlantis, for example, if we were to consider the time that Plato might have mentioned, could still be within the. So it's interesting, to like get an idea of how those societies worked according to the descriptions of the ages.
Once I went to a conference on Atlantis, and there was a researcher there who kind of did a kind of a group hypnotic regression, and I was participating in it, and we were kind of asked to, during the trance we were in, to kind of recall some memories of Atlantis, if we had any. So I remember that during that session, I had a strong impression that I had been at that time a child, maybe 10 or 11 years old or something. And that with many other children, we were being put on a boat to take us away from Atlantis, which was about to be or was under attack from some force or forces. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in a situation like that, you're at an Atlantis conference, and you're kind of in that mind space. So maybe what I experienced in that meditation was something that I just invented at the time, or maybe it was a recollection of something that really did happen.
Yeah, for me, just as I'm very deeply connected, at a spiritual level with the tradition from India, the idea of Atlantis also resonates at a very deep level for me. I know there's different descriptions or interpretations and different sources from which the story reached us, and I think there's some truth in all of the different sources. Um, but like, for example, some might say it was the city of Atlantis. Then you start researching it a little bit more, and you understand, no, was a worldwide culture. Just like we might say, when if it were to happen, when the United States, or when the West fell, we might say in a million years, in 1,000 years, or whatever, when the West fell, people from the next era might say, oh, there was this civilization called the West, and it fell. There was this city called the West, and it fell. But actually, it's a worldwide culture with people who in one part of the planet have their own local stuff, which is very different from the general overarching thing. So you might still be Atlantean, quote unquote, but if you're in the Middle East, your cultural expression of being an Atlantean might be very different from the ones in the maybe in the main city or in the capital, or the people who are on the Americas. They might still be Atlantean, but very different. So I think it's a very interesting, at the very least, it's a very interesting metaphor to try to understand information like the one you bring, the archaeological stuff of hundreds of thousands or millions of years old, that point to advanced human civilizations. It resonates as well for me.
Yeah,
And
well, one reason why I think human populations go very, very far back in time, really back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth, is that I believe that we exist in a consciousness-based universe. And this world that we live in, it's like an educational institution where we're meant to learn something about ourselves, truth, justice, love, as we were talking about in the previous session. So if that's true, if this universe is designed for that purpose, it's intended for that purpose as an educational institution, and that education of the conscious self is achieved in the human bodily vehicle, because I think the self is actually different than the bodily vehicle it inhabits. But I would say if the purpose is to educate the conscious selves in this universe, and that is done for the conscious selves in the human vehicle, then the human vehicle should have been there since the beginning. And I think that's what we actually see if we look at the evidence. But I don't rely upon archaeological evidence for this conclusion. I think it's interesting that archaeological evidence is consistent with this conclusion. But for me, that is just something that can help people who have no idea about this kind of see, well, maybe it's a possibility that I should consider.
Yeah. And let me ask you, I had this very curious question that came to me yesterday. So, okay, so we're talking about cycles of time, um, which, so the question comes to this. Let me see if I think I wrote it down because it's a very tricky question, about the nature of time itself.
Mhm.
So, do you think, in your understanding from your experience, reading all these texts and your own faith and your spirituality, what do you think? How do you think the cycles work? Is it like a flat circle, let's say, that repeats itself? So at some point in the future, there is one, let's say, one action that causes the one action that causes the past to begin again. Let's say there's like an action in the future, or like a that gives birth to the past, to the, like the final point in the future, quote unquote, the final point gives birth to the first point in the past. Like the circle is doing this, and something in the future over here starts the past again. Or do you think it's more kind of like a spiral that is also moving in a kind of, quote unquote, moving in a kind of another dimension as well? So at a certain point, the circle goes back around itself, but it's not in the same exact place. It's not flat, but it's actually 3D, let's say, and it comes back to this point in the spiral, but it's similar to what happened at that point before, but it's different at the same time, and it continues doing this indefinitely. What do you think? What's your understanding today?
Well, any thoughts that I might have about it are informed by my studies in the Puranic cosmology. So basically, what you have there is this kind of time that we experience in the material universe has a destructive aspect to it, that with the passing of time, entropy increases. And it's really not understood scientifically why it's like that, because the laws of physics are time reversible. Like if you have a ice cube in a glass of water at room temperature, the normal system is it melts, the ice cube melts. But it's just as probable that it could go the other way, that from the water you get an ice cube. The equations of physics are like that. They're time reversible. But what we see practically without any exception is things go in one direction. So that destructive power of time is there in this level of reality. On another level of reality, which we can call the spiritual level, sometimes they call it the level of pure consciousness, there is passage of time, but there's no destructive element to it. So that's the first kind of distinction, that you've got this other time where things happen in a sequence, but nothing is ever really lost. On this side of the boundary, you could say, you've got this destructive time, past, present, and future. Whereas on the other side of the boundary, you've got an eternal present, which isn't static, it's changing, but nothing is lost. So on this side, we've got those cycles, and it's not like there's, like you said, standing in one place, repeating. It's more like, the wheels of a bicycle. They're going around, but they're also making progress in a certain direction. So, but we're kind of stuck in a present, and then behind there's a past, and then we're coming into a future. But the cycles kind of go, the cycles of the duration of this time kind of go on and on and on. And in the course of that, because at some point, the cycle pauses in a sense that, one basic unit of this time cycle is called the Kalpa, or the day of Brahma. During the day of Brahma, life forms are manifest in the universe. And during the nights of Brahma, they're dormant, they're not manifest. But when the next day comes, then the conscious selves that were dormant, they again wake up, and they take up where they left off. Just like when we wake up from a dream, or each night, when we wake up from sleep each night, we're kind of, okay, now yesterday was Monday, today is Tuesday, I've got an interview with Michael Cremo, or I have an interview with Rafa. We kind of pick up from where we left off before we went to sleep. So there's a cycle of day and night, sleeping and waking, but we retain, in other words, we don't wake up each morning in an entirely different world, which is possible, but we wake up in basically the same body, in the same room that we went to sleep in, and we have our memories of the previous day. We have our conceptions of what's coming the next day or days. So, the cycles. So it's in these bigger cycles. It's the same. When the souls or the conscious selves go dormant during the night of Brahma, which lasts 4,320,000,000 years, and the next day of Brahma comes, all those conscious selves get put back in the kinds of bodies they were in when the last day of Brahma stopped. And they kind of know what to do. They pick up from where they left off. So, the wheels are going around, the cycles are going around, and we're in them, being carried by them, but it's not just, a repetitive thing like Groundhog Day, that movie where the same thing happens. As a result of our karma, our desires, the cycles are going around, but we're kind of moving somewhere, either towards an omega point, which is, I think, what you were referring to in the beginning. You were talking about one point towards which everything is moving. I don't think it's exactly like that, but things are moving.
Mm. Yeah, we might say evolving, but just so people don't get the wrong idea,
Evolving
let's
is
just say
fine.
moving. Yeah.
Evolving is fine. I, because I think there is an evolution of consciousness, an evolution of the soul, you could say, through different kinds of bodily vehicles. But the kind of evolution that most scientists today now accept, the evolution of the bodies, I don't think they've provided very good evidence for that. And from traditional wisdom sources, we have a different idea, namely the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah, what's evolving perhaps linearly is this higher thing we know as consciousness, but it's very possible that for that to happen, the material or cultural and the human evolution might be something that goes in cycles as well. So it evolves, then it devolves, then it evolves again, but carries something from the previous era, and it goes down and it goes up, which I think it resonates with the ideas of the Yugas.
Yeah,
Mm,
it's possible.
definitely, and something very worth
Even
considering for the
even
future of
even
science.
plausible to some extent.
Yeah. Well, Michael, once again, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I've had a great time. I hope you had a good time as well. Um, I have so many notes here of stuff that I wrote to ask, but I really love conversations that just flow, and there's stuff that I didn't get to, but we can probably get to that in the next opportunity that we get to speak together.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Some of the questions are more dealing with the nature of the gods. In Hinduism, you have different gods, and some of them are like aspects of another one, and then you have a trinity, and it's separated into different, and each one of them has their different manifestations, and so it's a very rich tradition, which I would love to explore together the next time, and actually even look at how knowing this stuff can help us to create a better world for all of us. Well, but that's just a cliffhanger for next time for people who are
Yeah.
watching. And I would like to ask you one final question, which I'm asking all guests at the end, which is, you can interpret it as you would like. The question is, what is the one thing that got you to where you are today?
The recognition when God has put a step in front of me that I should take, and that it would be wrong not to take.
Amazing. That's a great answer. A very original answer. And yeah, well, for me, when I've answered this one, I've only answered it once, but I would like to share my answer with you as well. For me, and because it's similar, for me, it's faith. Even when I didn't consider myself a religious person, you know, I look back to my path, to my journey, and I see how important faith has been for me. It's my concept perhaps of faith has evolved through time, but it's always been there. I've always known that in my deepest being, I've always known there's something else, there's something more to learn, to grasp, to open myself up to, and yeah, and that's my answer.
Yeah, I think what I said is also based on a kind of faith, you know, because yeah, there are different turning points in life where you can take a step in one direction, it leads to something. And if you took a step in another direction, it would lead somewhere else. So I think I've always had, faith that I can recognize when a step is being put in front of me that I should take that will lead me in a direction that'll take me to my ultimate goals or that I have in mind, which are basically, as I outlined, to know the truth about things, to have justice for myself and for others, and to find true love. So one does have to have faith, I believe. And I think that what I said in response to your question also does require a kind of faith in one's judgment, faith in the universe, you could say. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea of God placing kind of like the scaffolding in front of you, and you're recognizing which where your next step should stand upon, right?
Yes.
Well, amazing. Thank you everybody as well for being there with us. One more time, you can find Michael Cremo on his website mcremo.com, and thank you so much, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. I also hope, Michael, you've had a nice time as well. And yeah, like we were saying, we'll be meeting again very soon. I'll get in touch with you again, and we can schedule a third round of these beautiful conversations. All right?
Yeah, I'd like that. Thank you.
Also, well, thank you, everybody. Hare Krishna. Bye bye.